Welcome back, everyone, to the Kriya Yoga podcast. I'm here once again with our special guest, David McGrath from Ireland, a Kriya Yoga teacher, student of Roy Eugene Davis. And today we're going to be talking about his new book on the yamas and niyamas. Welcome, David. It's great to have you.
Great to be here, Ryan. Great to have the opportunity to talk to you and be listened to once again.
Yeah. So tell us the title of your book.
Yeah. So I titled it The Yogi's Way. And if I'm honest, there's probably going to be quite a few of your listeners that know of The Artist's Way. And I had just gifted a friend of mine the book, The Artist's Way, while I was in the middle of writing The Yogi's Way. And I just thought, well, if there's a way for artists, there's definitely a way for yogis. So it seemed appropriate just to transfer it and use The Yogi's Way.
This is your first book, correct?
It's my first book. It's first book that is being published online for people to buy. I've done little booklets and things like that before, but this is the first book of this kind. Yeah, definitely.
Well, I think it's okay to use another book's name as a template. The book I wrote, A Course in Tranquility, was kind of based on A Course in Miracles.
I had suspected, yeah. But sometimes you forget to ask these questions. Yeah. It's like a friend of mine said to me about I had written the song before and I played it to him and I said, "Do you know who that sounds like? Do you know what song that sounds like?" And he goes, "Oh, now I know. Now that you mentioned, I knew it sounded like somebody." But he picked it out straight away. It was a group that we both liked growing up. But I said, "Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's a bit too similar." And he goes, that's what everybody does. You just take somebody else's work and then you just embellish it with your own kind of perspective. It's nothing's everything, even the way we dress and everything else is kind of just an embellishment of other people's ideas. Yeah.
Well, and especially in a teaching or practice or writing like this, I mean, we're basically just carrying on a tradition to make it appropriate to our time, rather. So you're doing that with the yamas and the niyamas.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the name is fitting also in terms of the yamas and niyamas are very much about how we engage with the world. And when we talk about the yogi's way, I think, we always talk about our spiritual paths and the journey of enlightenment and the waking up. And a lot of it has onus on meditation practice. But I think just talking about the yogi's way gives the idea that there are obstacles and things that we come across and just trying to figure out and become skilled at living itself. I think calling it the yogi's way just embodies some of what it means to be practicing the yamas and niyamas.
Yeah. And this is a pretty intense book. But before we get into the content so much, I'm curious, what inspired you to write this book?
That's a good question. Because I think if I had been asked, earlier on when I started offering instruction in yoga and Kriya yoga, would I write a book on the yamas and niyamas? I don't think that had as much appeal as writing a book on meditation or, experiencing higher states of consciousness or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. The yamas and niyamas became more significant to me through life experience. And with you, I was talking with you during the pandemic, at the beginning of the pandemic, when I was really connecting to the practice once again, and especially to be getting back to teaching. And I had kind of taken I wouldn't say stopped practicing yoga, but I had taken a step back from being so fanatical about how I was practicing yoga. And when I returned to practicing yoga, I realized that sitting and meditating doesn't kind of clean you out or purify you in the way that yoga is inviting you to purify yourself. And while the meditation practice does allow for that self-analysis to gain greater awareness and to move deeper and to experience deeper states of awareness, it doesn't do all the work, and living itself provides us with a great opportunity to do a lot of the work. But how to live is not always so easily to discern when we listen to teachers and hear what they're talking about and attend seminars and all the other things that we do to gain insight on how we're supposed to be practicing as yogis. Sometimes we can become very fixated on the formal practices and the pranayamas and the asanas and the actual meditation practice itself, using the variety of different techniques. But what the yamas and niyamas offer, we can sometimes just scoot over a little bit too quickly. And I know for me, that was what I did. I did reflect on the yamas and niyamas. I did kind of review them in terms of how I was living, but I don't think I really moved beyond what I had interpreted each yama and niyama to mean, as in the word itself, ahimsa, for example, meaning non-violence and non-hurting. It's very easy just to hear that word and then just write it off for what the word actually means for us as English speakers. But the depth of what the concept of ahimsa actually is, we can only really come to grips with when we commit ourselves to just scrutinizing it and analyzing it and pulling it apart in terms of how we're actually living our lives. So when you ask me what motivated me to do it, what got me to write a book like this or write the book on the yamas and niyamas, it was very much about being able to ensure that my practice was helping me to become more skilled at living rather than just becoming skilled at going into a trance state. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a little more common, at least at this current in this current era, for people to be more attracted to get the fantastic meditation technique rather than maybe you should be more truthful and content and pure. Yeah. But there's a reason that the yamas and the niyamas are at the foundation of the 8 limbs of yoga. And I'm going to put a question to you that was actually put to me recently to see how you respond to it. Someone asked, how does the yamas and niyamas actually support our meditation practice, and vice versa? How does the meditation practice also support the yamas and niyamas? So I'm curious, do you talk about this in the book? And if not, could you just give us a little idea of what you think?
Well, this is why I wrote the book, Ryan.
Exactly. Yes.
And, in writing the book, it's very challenging to be able to communicate simply the depths of how each one supports the other. Let me see if I can sum it up as best as I can from what I know and what I experienced.
Take your 336-page book and just put it into like a minute or two.
Yeah. I might even do better. I might get two sentences. I think that what we experience in our formal practices, primarily meditation practice, is only as good as we're able to register the more clarified states of awareness that we experience when we return to living our informal lives and engaging with the world. If when we're engaging in the world, those states aren't staying with us, if they're not, if they're becoming clouded over because of engaging with life, it's likely to be as a result of our not adhering to the yamas and niyamas. And so I mentioned how we can look at the words and the words themselves. Are we being truthful? Are we not stealing? And we can look at it on a superficial level, but at a very profound level. If we're living in absolute harmony with life, or with a state of oneness consciousness, or in a state of absolute awareness, then the words don't really matter. It's the experience of reality and just accepting everything as it's occurring. And in our meditation practice, we endeavor to do this by progressively letting go of all the attachment to the many, many different layers as we work deeper and deeper within, ultimately arriving at that state of oneness consciousness. But in our day-to-day living, we're endeavoring to live with the same state of oneness consciousness, but we may find ourselves just getting kind of pulled away from it because of impurities. And And I think then in our meditation practice, we're not actually going to be able to move into experiencing a deeper state of oneness consciousness or a state of deeper awareness, because those impurities still exist and they're still there. They're still impressed upon our minds, upon our psyche. And so we may feel like we're getting deeper in our practice. We may feel that we're having a magnificent experience, but it's only insofar as we're able to imagine how deep we can go. And obviously we can't imagine the ultimate experience, because it's only going to be available to us through our practice. I'm not sure. Did that answer it, or did that kind of...
It gave me some good information, but I'll try to be a little more clear. But before we do that, you kept using the word impurity.
Yeah.
And some people might hear that and they kind of take it a little more biblical or Christian. So when you use the word impurity in the context of the yamas and niyamas and yoga and meditation, what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So one thing I have to admit before I start answering your question is that words can really play games with us. Like, it's really tricky to, like you just said there, some people in the word impurities has certain connotations that for me, it doesn't hold those connotations. And this is the challenge, because within each of us, a certain word is going to push certain buttons. And for some people, it might be more positive and others not so positive. And that in itself demonstrates the impurities that we have, the fact that we can have these buttons pushed within us. And so when we talk about being able to experience a state of clarified conscious awareness, in order to be able to experience that state, we have to overcome all the other stuff that's just preventing us from experiencing that state. I know that Roy Davis used to call this as being our fragmented consciousness, and that we're trying to move beyond those obstacles so that we can experience the whole nature of consciousness. And so for each individual, it'll be different. But when I'm talking about impurities, I'm talking about all the conditioning, all the constructs that we've taken on and which have become impressed upon our psyche, upon our minds, and which put a kind of filter on how we perceive what's going on around us. And then as a consequence of that, we're unable to just engage with life as it's happening, but instead we engage with our imagined projections of what's happening around us.
So when it comes to practicing harmlessness or non-attachment or contentment, the yamas and niyamas, a few of the yamas and niyamas, why is that beneficial to someone to help them meditate better, to help people understand why those are so important for their meditation practice?
Yeah. Each of the different principles offered by the yamas and niyamas, when someone's endeavoring to live in accord with each one, or when they're endeavoring to look at how they're living through the magnifying glass of each one of those principles, they're helping to examine their own mind and examine their own psyche, and to examine exactly what the conditioning or the constructs of their psyche are. And so by doing that constant reflection, when they partake in formal practice, when they sit to meditate, there's a capacity to discern with greater ease. There's a capacity to be able to not be bothered by all those constructs or those conditionings. And I think it's important here when we talk about constructs and conditionings, like everything that we're living in our lives is as a consequence of our own imagination. Like everything is a projection of caused or brought about through our own imaginings, and how you're seeing the world, how I see the world is very different just based on all of these samskaras or based on all of these conditionings and subconscious tendencies. And so by taking responsibility for our own living and engaging in life and reflecting on how we're doing it, using the magnifying glass or the scalpel of each of these principles, then we become we help ourselves to peel back the layers of each one of these, brought about by each one of these conditionings or these constructs in a systematic way. Now, I'm not saying it's an easy process, but by just committing ourselves to the process in and of itself helps us in our meditation practice, because in our meditation practice, we're trying to do the same thing, to just cut through everything that we're identifying with so that we can just experience being and existing as awareness. And so the two practices supplement or complement each other in this way.
Yeah. And your book is fairly intensive in regards to how it helps a person kind of dig into that. So how is the book set up? Like, what is the process within the book?
Well, the process which is offered in the book is based on a process which I used myself. And that's why I felt comfortable to put together such an intense book, or to put together a book which was quite rigorous and demanding of the reader.
Because you figure if you can do it, anyone can do it, right?
Well, it was more, not that if I could do it, anyone could do it, but rather what I got from doing it was so advantageous that I'd like someone else to be able to enjoy that same kind of fulfillment. But I also noted in putting together the book together, because it's put together in a kind of week by week way, as in each the reader or the one practicing focuses on one of the principles per week, and so it goes on for a long period of time. But I acknowledge that when you put a book out there, or even a teaching or an instruction of any kind, when it's in the hands of another individual, they'll just do what they want with it. And so I've written the book. Some people might even just find it helpful as a reference book. Some people might find that they're going to do it day by day rather than week by week. I understand that it's not necessarily going to be done as I've outlined or intended it to be done. But who's to say that I'm right in saying that it has to be done week by week anyway? It's just that I've laid it out in the way that worked for me, and I felt allowed enough space and time to really go deep with each of the principles. But who's to say what anybody else is going to do with the book or the material in it? Yeah.
What is as an example, do you take one of the yamas or the niyamas, and then what? And then what does the reader do?
Yeah. So okay, it's done in sequences, and there are in total 16 sequences. And so in each sequence, it goes through each of the 10 principles. So in each sequence, there's a week given to each of the 10 principles. So in sequence 2, for each of the principles, there's a reading which will have to be done daily. It's a short reading which is read daily, and the reason it's suggested it's read daily is just because it allows the individual to get an understanding of the principle or the yama or niyama from that point of view, from that aspect. And then there's a writing exercise which is encouraged, and then a reflective exercise, and then there's a supplementary exercise at the end. Now, in each of the sequences, there is a reading, and each of the sequences there's a writing, and there's a daily reflection that's that readers are invited to do, and there's also a supplementary exercise. So what's different about each of the sequences is that there's a different reading in each one, and they get progressively more metaphysical, or progressively more internal in what they're suggesting, and the writing becomes more and more towards the readers being responsible for what they're writing. Initially, it'll be, the first exercise I'm reading here is think about an action of ahimsa, and every day write down 7 words which you feel help to describe the practice of ahimsa. So it's just a short exercise to help people to kind of bash out what ahimsa is. But as you move through the book with the sequences, that writing exercise becomes more profound, or more I suppose it requires a bit more knowledge of the principle itself, and your relationship to it. And then the daily reflection, that's quite simple. That's just reflecting on your life and how you're engaging in life, and just writing, keeping a journal. But then the supplementary exercises, there's a wide range of things. Just looking onto sequence, one sequence, just without going too quiet for your listeners. Going on to sequence 6.
They should be okay with silence.
They should be. Yeah. So there's towards the end, what I've put in as there's actual specific practices which the individual has to carry out. So Here's for Svadhyaya in week 81, in week 81. Observe every desire that arises within you, urging you to carry out a specific action. And before you do it, ask yourself what you're doing the action for. What's the emotion that's driving the desire? And once you've elicited the emotion, again, ask yourself, what do you want to feel that emotion for? What's the purpose of the emotion? And then elicit the reason why and its underlying emotion. And just the idea is to be able to help the individual to work through emotions. So Svadhyaya, we know, is self-study, but just there's many levels to studying the self. But all of them, as you've mentioned, are to facilitate our being able to meditate more deeply, to move into a state of pure conscious awareness. But in our lives, we have to look at how we get caught up with the different identifications. And one of the key things that causes us to get caught up is our emotional drives. And so this exercise is kind of helping people to reflect on that. And then towards the end, I've put in supplementary exercises which lead. There's a QR code, or if it's on Kindle, there's a hyperlink that goes through to audios. And for sequence, I think it's 16. Sequence 13, there's just guided exercises where the individual will be guided through a process which will help them reflect on the specific yama or niyama. And then in a later sequence, there's a guided meditation practice. So all of it is aiming to kind of, as yoga is itself a systematic approach, the whole book is designed to be a systematic approach to help the reader or the practitioner to get very, very familiar with how they relate to each of the principles, to the point that towards the end of the book, as I experienced, all of these 10 different principles are in essence one principle, and that is the principle of yoga. That is the principle of oneness consciousness. But it's helpful for us to break them down into 10 individual principles, because then we're able to it's bite-sized. We're able to at least approach it in a different way. But ultimately, I think, as our teacher, Roy Davis, used to say, a yogi will do these things naturally, to the point that they're not even thinking about them. They're not even saying, well, that was non-stealing, that was non-hurting. And I think what I experienced after going through this process myself was just a deeper understanding of, really, it's being a yogi is just about being one. And and the only way we can be one is to remove everything that prevents us from being one. And all of the things that prevent us from being one is all the just imaginings and the preferences, which could kind of distort our perspective on reality. And that's the idea of the book, is to take advantage of each of the principles so as that we can progressively move to just experiencing what's beyond them all. Yeah.
I've been told, I don't know if it's true or not, but I've been told that Yogananda used to say that 90% of the spiritual path was a psychological battle. And once you get past that, well, then it just kind of takes care of itself. And looking at the yamas and niyamas, it always occurred to me that if you want to know how psychologically healthy you are, well, then just see how well you do the yamas and the niyamas.
Yeah.
And if you can do them well, then you're all right. And if you have struggle with them, not to label anyone as psychologically unhealthy, but if you have trouble with one of them, well, for example, why does someone have trouble with truthfulness? Well, because psychologically they're afraid of something, right? Yeah. And why do people have trouble with contentment? Well, because psychologically, there's things getting in the way, these impurities, I think, that you might be talking about. Does that seem accurate? Is that how you would tie it together?
Yeah, well, when you bring in the word being afraid, what kind of shone out to me after having to do it all, doing it, writing up the book and completing it and publishing it, is that fear is kind of the driver of everything. And the yoga, or it seems to be the opposite, that state of oneness consciousness, we can do, again, we can break it down into words like being truthful and being content and different things, but ultimately it's just trusting, living in a state of absolute trust where there's no fear, there's no need for fear, because there's no separation, there's no distinction. But as we say, all these words are very challenging, and I respect that people who are coming to yoga, because, I've been involved in yoga for 20 years now. And I respect that people coming to yoga, or people who maybe have been part of another tradition and are transitioning, or whatever it is, people who might pick up this book just because they happen to be in the bookshop where it's on the shelf, that we're not all at the same space or in the same place, and we don't all have the same conditioning or constructs in our mind. And so what an individual might get from the book might be very different to another individual. But what I think is of key importance to mention is that the book's not about helping someone to become perfect. Like the idea that, oh, well, I need to stop telling lies all the time, or I need never to steal, because I really get, and you can share your viewpoint on this, but I really have a sense that there is no right and wrong. There is no absolute truth within this domain of this creation that we're engaging in. And there's no, even we have got it sound a bit rebellious or radical here, but even though we have different authorities who are putting rules in place and different things, they are all constructs, and everything is a construct. And it's just when we start, we use those constructs and we identify with those constructs in order to have social harmony and social order and different things, and that makes sense. But sometimes you'll see somebody in a car, or even myself, I've noticed myself, if I'm cycling on a bike and somebody breaks a rule and they do something which is against the rules of society, I am inclined to, or have been inclined at least, to call out that person, to judge them, or to make a criticism, and then act in a way which is actually, I might insult them, or, say, what are you doing? Or get out, what you did there was wrong, but not in a manner which is harmonious and supportive, because that person might have broken that rule for many, many different things. And I have no idea what's going on in that individual's life. But because I'm able to use the social constructs that we all adhere to, I can justify my own action, even though my action is, I can justify it saying, well, at least I know what that person did was wrong. It was against this social construct, whatever it might be. But my action on an inner level is against the yoga constructs of the 10 principles. And those 10 principles, I can call them constructs, the 10 yamas, or the 5 yamas and 5 niyamas. They're constructs, but they're constructs which help to guide us back to that which is not constructed, that which is beyond, which is yoga, the state of oneness.
Right. But they do that in a way to make it so that, using the idea of fearlessness, so that one is fearless. And it reminded me of the 26 qualities and characteristics that lead to a divine destiny in the Bhagavad Gita. So that's your next book. You got to write the 26 characteristics. Bigger book. But if you think about that, well, if yoga says truthfulness needs to be practiced at all times, no matter the time, place, or circumstance. Yeah. Because I do think it says that at some point in the yamas and niyamas, right? Yeah. And if you do that, you are affirming that you are not afraid of practicing the truth, no matter the time, place, or the circumstance. And so that is affirming fearlessness. Absolutely. Right. Did you want to say more? Well, no, go ahead. No, and yeah, absolutely. And even the idea of, to give example, I like giving examples because I feel it just brings it makes it more tangible for people. A simple thing like I take somebody. Wait, could you do it in a parable, maybe? No. And my examples might be pushing the boundaries here a little bit too. But if somebody takes your piece of cake, someone takes your piece of cake and then they come into the room and ask you, did you take the piece of cake? And you say outright, no, I didn't take the piece of cake, and you're lying bluntly. There is a fear, and the fear might either be that the person's going to give you a punch in the face because you took their piece of cake, or the fear might be that you're actually good friends with the person and you did wrong and you don't want them to think any little of you or anything less of you. So it's just not being able to be honest with ourselves is the fear that by being honest with ourselves and presenting ourselves as we actually are to the world, we won't be accepted or loved or whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so fear, I think, it really is a root there of a lot of what we do. But a little earlier on, when you were talking about the idea of there not being any sort of hard and fast rules that you have to follow all the time, how does that play into this idea? Because I was getting the sense that, maybe sometimes it's okay to, Yeah, like this is the paradox, though, isn't it? Because it's very easy for me to say there's no hard and fast rules,
But at the same time, we need rules. It's you know, it depends on whose ears these fall as well, because how a certain individual might hear the idea of, well, you know, it's a spectrum rather than it being on two sides. There's a spectrum of experience rather than it's either black or white, and depending on the circumstances, and we can get into all the details to kind of bash this out, but depending on whose ears these fall, or these words will fall, they might be inclined to say, oh, well, that's it. I can break every rule. And, you know, it doesn't really matter what I do because, you know, I'm just being truthful to me and I'm doing it the way I want to do. But that's what the book endeavors to do, is to start at where we're at, or start at least in just getting to grips with what we actually understand by the word truthfulness. Like, because some people will say, well, truthful means don't tell lies. For other people, it's no, truthfulness means that you don't even take something without asking somebody for something. You know, it's truthfulness is down to every last detail. And other people might say, well, it's just a white lie. That's not really, you know, I'm still being truthful. I didn't mean anything bad by it. And so people kind of dress up the word truth according to what their own preferences are, their own impurities are. Mm-hmm. And so what the book's endeavoring to do is just to help the reader and the practitioner to move progressively into understanding and exposing really how they relate to the concept, not the word truthfulness, but the concept. Like, what does it actually embody? What does it actually signify for them in terms of how they engage with the world on a physical, emotional, and mental level? Not just in terms of how they use the word in conversation, you know. Mm. So because the word itself is just a word, you know, even when we talk about the color blue, the way you perceive blue and the way I perceive blue, and we all have different variations or imaginings on what blue is according to our own preferences. And it's the same with all of the yamas and niyamas. And then, you know, you might have read certain books, been exposed to different teachings. So when you read the word tapas, you might have a different perception as opposed to somebody who maybe grew up in an orthodox religious background, and they might feel that, well, that idea of discipline it's not really fitting in with my wanting to break away from all of that fanaticism or whatever it might be that they might be wanting to let go of. So I think it's really about how we relate to what things mean for us at a conceptual level. And so the book aims to progressively help the reader and the practitioner to peel back the many layers which are kind of wrapping up each one of these principles, so that eventually they can get to an experience of the principle as a way of being, rather than a principle as something that they talk about and they kind of put their own imaginings on, you know? Right.
So it's helping to take them from, like you said, their words and their concepts and the baggage that might be linked to that, and hopefully, ideally, move them into a direct experience of that as it relates to yoga practice, as it relates to removing those obstacles to recognizing the self, or the oneness consciousness that yoga is meant to do.
Absolutely. Like when you say the self, like the seer is beyond concept. And the seer is beyond any construct and is just aware and being. And so once there's an identification with what's going on around us, it's coming from the imaginative mind. It's coming from a projection, and that projection is coming from the impressions. And all of those impressions are skewering what's actually just taking place. And so we've managed to come up with language. We have many different languages in the world, but each one of those languages aims to help us to share this experience of what's going on. But at the same time, nobody can say that we all understand a word in the same way, because those words are perceived and have been received in different contexts by different people, through different people, with different emotional connections, different ties. So nothing is absolutely pure in its form. It's all an attempt for us to try and connect and make sense of things. But when we move beyond the language, move beyond the word, move beyond the imagining. We can experience it as it is. And so there's no concept. And I'm not saying that an individual who uses the book will necessarily arrive at that automatically, but the process in itself is a process of purification, because what it's doing is it's challenging the reader to move beyond the word, move deeper into the concept, and start kind of, how would I say, scrutinizing the concept itself. So the concept as it's once had been understood and recognized is now more something which is being lived, something which is being embodied through the way that they're engaging with life.
Right.
It's a big ask. I'm not sure if somebody can give a review and say if they.
Well, it's definitely a good idea, and to have a process that actually takes people through the yamas and niyamas, I think, is wonderful, because when I teach, I talk about the yamas and niyamas, but I don't spend a whole lot of time on them, because I know that I'm not living the life that the person is living. I don't have, within, a week-long workshop or a seminar, I don't have time to work with an individual to figure out all of their psychological constructs. So there's kind of like, it's unless you're working very closely with someone, you have that capacity, which in my mind seems to be more of the role in these days of like a counselor or a therapist. There has to be some kind of trust that the people interested in yoga and meditation are actually trying to figure out how to work through and into the yamas and niyamas. Because when you come to, like I said, a week-long or a 2-week-long workshop, you can talk about them, but you can't train. I've never found a way to train someone in the yamas and niyamas. Yeah. Now, luckily, through the practice of yoga, in the beginning, we learn ahimsa. So what did I do? I tried to become a vegetarian. I quit trying to be so critical of people. I quit trying to be so critical of myself. I tried to do the things as I understood them.
Yes.
And as the years go by, well, now, a few decades later, the idea of harming someone just doesn't even feel right. Like it's not that I have to hold the concept and say, no, I'm not going to do this. It's like, if the opportunity arises, it just feels inappropriate to not be harmless.
Yeah, I have a question on that. Do you feel then that how you endeavored to adhere to the principle of ahimsa all those years ago compared to now has changed?
You mean how I did it? Or well, that's it. Like how, when we talk about adhering to a principle, is it about doing something, or is it more about an attitude or a perception of what it means? Well, I think one thing that has changed, using ahimsa as an example, and I would always go back to Autobiography of Yogi, when Yogananda's there and the mosquito lands on his lap, and he looks down at it, and Sri Kishore says, why don't you finish the job since you already killed it in your mind? I've gone back to that often because, people do ask, well, how can I be harmless all the time when there's this stuff going on in the world? And so in the beginning, the idea was just hold back your critical thoughts. That's one way. You might still have them, but hold back your critical thoughts, because that's going to be a little bit more harmless. Try to eat a vegetarian diet, because at least you're not, murdering a whole bunch of animals consciously. You're murdering some plants, but hey, you gotta weigh it. To now, over the years, where it's moved into just don't even have the intention. So in my mind, it's moved into more of like if there's even an intention of maliciousness, like that is harm.
Yeah.
And that has changed, where it went from just do your best to not physically act it out to address the actual what in me wanted me to be malicious in the first place.
Yeah.
And figuring out what that is and clearing that out, that naturally makes you harmless.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming your book plays into that.
Well, that's it. Because like all of that process takes a lot of reflection and a lot of analysis of your own way of being. And when you were talking about that, you were, there's no magic workshop that you can deliver that will just help every individual attending to be able to sort out all the yamas and niyamas and have a greater understanding of them, because it's highly personable. It's highly personalized and subjective. So in order for any individual to be able to do it, they have to take it on themselves. You talked about a therapist. If you go to a therapist, you can work through this stuff because you have somebody who's listening to your every word and feeding it back to you in a way where you're able to work through it and make sense of where you're kind of putting in your own blocks and work through things in that way. But when we're on our own, it's very difficult sometimes for us to do that. And maybe that's the hope for certain individuals when they do attend a meditation seminar or when they do attend a retreat, is that they're able to work out all the issues in their lives and get things sorted out. But actually what they're being shared, or what's been shared with them, is a process which is more internal, something which is which is spoken about generally, but then when people apply those techniques, they're going to have their own personalized experience of what's going on when they apply those techniques. And it's difficult for a teacher to know what's going on when they experience all this stuff. So our whole practice, adhering to the practice of yoga, is very personable. But the part that I found I kind of fall short on was, after years back, after having meditated for several years, was that I wasn't seeing in my life results which I thought were on par with how I felt my meditation was going. Later, I understood that I thought my meditation was going better than it actually was. But this is the whole thing. Like I talked earlier about, it's not about trying to, like the book's not about how to be perfect or the way of the perfectionist. It's not about that. It's about the way, the yogi's way is the way of always just being with reality, like always being with what's taking place, always being with it in a manner where you're discerning what's real from unreal, and always being there and ready and willing to do that. And the two attributes which are often said to be the things that prevent anybody from doing this is being lazy and having a restless mind. And the yamas and niyamas, if we're reflecting on them every day before we go to bed, even without the book, if we just sit down with each one of those and journal on it or reflect on it and ask ourselves, okay, well, how did I not adhere to each one of these principles throughout the course of the day? That in itself, it helps us to become more attuned to being able to discern where we're missing reality, where we're actually just being in our own heads and we're in our own projections and our own imaginings and our own conditioning. And then as you talked earlier about a meditation practice, how does it influence our meditation practice? Because for a lot of people, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners will be able to relate to this, that when we sit to meditate, if there's stuff going on in our lives that is anyways kind of gripping, as in an experience in our life which we're just finding it difficult to disidentify with, because maybe it's a confrontation we had, or maybe it's something happening at work or whatever, and maybe when we sit to meditate we don't feel like it's something that's going on, but as soon as we sit to meditate it just kind of starts to bubble up, and then because it bubbles up, all this other stuff that's associated bubbles up, and next thing you know, we're not even able to stay focused on whatever technique we're using, and the whole meditation is kind of sabotaged. So what do we do at that point? Do we just throw in the towel and whatever, what do we do? By following and adhering to each of the yamas and niyamas on a regular basis, and using the support of this book if you choose, then it just puts you in a space to not have that contamination so going on in your mind when you sit to meditate, because you're already active on it. You're already discerning it as you're living it. You're already doing your best to stay with the real and to disregard the unreal. So when you sit to meditate, you're giving yourself the space just to continue with that process, rather than giving yourself a space to start reflecting on all the stuff that you've been trying to push away,
Right. And that's why I think your book's great. As we've been doing this, I've been acting as though I have not read the book, but I have read the book just for the readers. But what I find so wonderful about it is that, you talked about how when you sit to meditate, now you're not just having to push stuff away because you're working with it moment by moment when it arises.
Yeah.
And that is, again, why this book is so important, because you use the word impurity, and the word that comes up for me is clean. It's like it keeps you clean, so that, when you sit to meditate, you don't have to go through the whole process of de-stressing. You don't have to go through the whole process of just trying to forget about all that stuff. It's, you dealt with it in the moment.
Yeah.
So that way, when you finally sit down to practice your pranayama and your internalization of attention and your focus and your meditation, it makes it easier for you to flow into a samadhi state, because you've attended to everything as it's happened.
Yeah.
And I think that is the beauty of what you have done in this book, and the beauty of the yamas and niyamas. And I think it needs to be something that's more, has a little more stress, a little more emphasis put on it, because the idea is that you talked about, Roy had said that a yogi will just live this way.
Yeah.
It's natural. It's natural to the yogi. And I think when a lot of people first get involved in meditation, spirituality, like, they're doing it because they want to experience something that they think is better than their normal experience.
Yeah.
And as though by doing that, they're naturally all of a sudden going to be able to be content, or they're naturally all of a sudden going to be able to surrender in God. But what they're missing often, not always, but often, is that the way you access that state is by practicing being content and surrendering in God and so on. So it actually feeds back into the overall experience. You don't do it to get those things. You do those things for the wholeness of it all.
Well, that's it. And I think the wholeness of it all, when we're talking about, you took the example of what, by adhering to the principles and reflecting on the principles, it helps us when we go to our meditation practice, because then we're able to experience the awareness with greater ease. But if we look at the whole picture of waking up, or the picture of being able to just recognize what is absolutely real and be awakened to that, that action of what we're doing and how we're relating to life on a practical level and an informal level, as I say, and then the practices we do formally, those two start to become or recognized as being the same practice. Essentially, it's a practice of surrender, and a practice of just continuously letting go. And you had said something there that triggered a thought in my mind. I'll see if it comes back to me. No, it slipped my mind. Over to you, Ryan.
Okay. Well, one thought that came up was, thinking of the whole 8 limbs of yoga and the fact that the yamas and niyamas are in the beginning. Well, how are we supposed to experience samadhi, or to concentrate, if we weren't truthful in our daily life? And so when we sit to meditate, where we have all that baggage of the things that we weren't truthful about, or if we didn't practice non-attachment, how is it that we're going to sit down and detach from all the stuff so that we can actually shift our awareness into a state of samadhi? It's like when you look at the yamas and niyamas, their practice allows it so that your life is organized such that when you sit to meditate, now you can actually focus on what the meditation is supposed to be focused on, which is directing your awareness towards the wholeness, or directing your awareness to the self, the absolute aspect of yourself, versus all the distractions. So,
but in terms of experience, samadhi is a synonym for yoga. Yoga is a synonym for samadhi, and then yoga is defined as being the neutralizing, or the capacity to manage and regulate everything which is occurring in the mind. Because everything that's occurring in the mind is what's preventing us from just seeing reality. Like, reality is the real, is the real, but everything that's occurring in the mind is what's distorting it, so making it, personalizing it. So we're creating our own little worlds. I've got my world, you've got your world, and then within this world, that's that's an explanation which can be quite tricky to kind of get our heads around. Like there's something real that's out there and we're trying to experience it. And I think when people come to yoga and to other traditions, there's an idea that there's something extra that I'm going to be able to experience. And if I meditate and I do these things, I'm going to have that extra experience. I'm going to have that superpower, so to speak. And getting back to the idea of surrendering and letting go, the yamas and niyamas and adhering to those principles and really just investigating how we relate to them in terms of how we relate to our lives, it starts to peel back all the ways that we kind of conjure up our life or experience. We kind of conjure up what we're experiencing and in this way create our own little worlds. So by really using these 10 principles as a framework to kind of superimpose it upon how we're living our lives, and then as a consequence of that, see how we've actually put on so many layers on top of what's actually taking place. And I'm looking out my window here as I'm talking to you, and I'm seeing this tree and there's leaves on the tree. And, you know, if I superimpose the yamas and niyamas onto that, and I'm looking out and I go, okay, well, the relationship I have to that tree is it's an existing relationship. There's a beingness which is shared, but it becomes complicated because of the fact that I have maybe climbed trees, or I've cut down trees, or I've burned trees, or
you fell off a tree.
I have, and I've done that. Or, you know, what's going on in the Amazon, and all my opinions on that, and the fact that, you know, my uncle might be somebody who cuts down trees for a living, sells firewood, and all these different things takes away the fact that the tree is just being, and I'm just being, and we're both just doing that. And so the real is no longer the real. The real is now a load of stories, an awful lot of stories. And so the yamas and niyamas are that framework, which as I superimpose it upon my life, I can start to scrutinize how I'm engaging in life in a way where I can say, well, actually, I'm just narrating stories over what's taking place. And progressively then, this helps to understand and recognize how the mind is functioning. It's functioning as something which is creating thought waves, which is creating imaginings, which is projecting on and distorting the reality and preventing me from having this experience of yoga oneness, this experience of samadhi. So it's not a super experience which is outside of what we're having. It's actually all here. It's just that it's very much about being with it rather than being in the head and being with the projections of the mind. And so again, applying the 10 principles using, okay, we got the words, but then those concepts and really delving into what each one of those concepts is, as I mentioned earlier, it kind of starts to merge into the general filter that we put on life itself. And that general filter, you know, ultimately will just dissolve itself and be experienced as yoga. I know that sometimes the explanations, they can go two-ended. They can go very extreme and very far out and very metaphysical, but they can also be brought back to very tangible experiences. And in terms of the book, for somebody who's just starting out as a meditator, or somebody who's just kind of trying their hand at developing their own or establishing their own meditation routine, and all these concepts that are being offered through yoga, such as samadhi, all of these concepts are very abstract in certain ways, but so are words such as truth. It's a very abstract concept. And so although samadhi is a Sanskrit word which we kind of take a while to get our head around, it's worthwhile getting our head around the yamas and niyamas, truth, or ahimsa, satya, whatever language you might want to use, because the language and the word itself isn't what's important. It's the concept. It's what it's pointing to. And then understanding how we relate to what it's pointing to, so that ultimately we can just understand that there is no relationship. There's nothing being pointed to. It's just an experience. Yeah.
And one final question, just for listeners to be prepared as they go into this process, because the more I think about it, the more I feel like I need to make this book part of the recommended reading for the Kriya apprenticeship program. How many weeks does it take to go through the book? Because you mentioned 85 weeks, so we're already into a year and a half, and I thought there was quite a few.
Oh yeah. It goes. So how long is the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship?
Yeah, 2 years. 2 years.
Yeah, it just clocks over the 2 years. It clocks in. I looked it up the other day. I wanted to see. There's 138 weeks. It comes in at 2.6 years.
Wow, that's great.
In saying that, at the very intro of the book, I've put it out in plain, because we're all individuals who get distracted. And that's kind of part of the whole thing, that we do get lazy and we get restless. And as a consequence, we become distracted. This is a book that, if you get to week 23 and then you get distracted and, a couple of weeks later you go, oh, I stopped doing that. The book is very open to you just being able to come back and start off at the same place. I know that, we all have different temperaments. Some people get very OCD and they go, I need to go back to the start and I need to do it all again. Or, and other people are more kind of, I don't need to do a week. I can just do a day in this one, 3 days in this one. So we all have our different approaches, but the book is flexible in terms of who we are as people, because it's recognizing that the whole objective is to kind of be a guide to help people guide themselves through their own understanding the nature of their mind and being able to purify everything that's kind of distorting their perception of what's going on. And so it is designed to go over 2.5 years. But for some, it might be 10. For some, it might just be a bit less. For some, it might be just a pocketbook. So, yeah.
Okay.
Always,
Excellent. Well, so this book is available on Amazon. Let's see. The Yogi's Way, Living in Accord with the Yamas and Niyamas. I'll put a link to it in the bottom of the video and also in the bottom of the podcast. How do you recommend, again, for people to get in touch with you? If they want to get in touch with you or do some classes?
I love when you ask me this question, because, ideally I'd have a website, but I don't have a website. But I do have a linked tree account. Do you know a linked tree? So a linked tree, and then it's / David McGrath.
Okay, well, we'll put that in the information too. And this will be released before the end of 2022, probably. Let's see, probably in October, maybe the end of October. So those of you who might be living in Ireland or in other places on that side of the Atlantic, David and I are also planning on doing a Kriya Yoga retreat over in Ireland next fall in 2023. So I'm going to let you contact David to let you know that you're interested in that, and he can keep track of it. So anyway, thank you for being here again, David. Wonderful that you've written that book, and I can't wait to hear what people have to say about it. And I have to say, Ryan, I appreciate your taking the time to read it and also to write the foreword. You didn't mention that, so I'll mention that. Oh, yes. Well, I didn't want to draw attention to myself since it's your book. I did for you. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's interesting when you write a book. For any of your listeners who are writing books, there's a reliance on others. Yes, that you're not really up until that point. You rely on people for different things, but when it comes to writing a book, you call on people for their other skills, and it's interesting. Yeah. Yes, proofreading and forwarding and blurbs and all of that. Yeah, the list goes on. It does. So thank you for your support and help. Thank you. No problem. Well, thank you for being here, and we'll see you sometime soon. Absolutely. Okay. Absolutely.